Every once in a while we get lucky.
Every once in a while. Got to take it when you can get it. Okay. Is there anything that we need to address prior to bringing the jury in prosecution?
I don't believe so, Judge.
There is one thing, Your Honor, I apologize.
Mr. Young?
We're going to start calling some mental health experts as early as this morning after this first witness.
Okay.
I just think it might be appropriate for the court to instruct the jury that their evidence is being presented solely for the purposes of the insanity issue. Because I don't plan on getting into physical evidence of the guilt versus not guilty aspect of this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I'm not sure that I would give a specific instruction on it, though.
I just throw it out there for the defenses.
I would request the instruction, I think, because the evidence, especially the statements of Ms. Stauch, are used only for the sanity. It's almost like a 404B instructions, based upon the case on so forth since it's unitary trial. Her statements made to mental health professional only go towards her sanity, not towards case. That's what my position, so I do think it's instructions.
And in addition, Your Honor, I did get a chance to talk to Mr. Tweeney this morning. Some of the witnesses are going to be talking about the competency evaluations, which clearly would go to the issue of insanity. And I think that would further elaborate the need to instruct the jury for the limited purposes of
I am not familiar with a stock instruction on that. We've had unity trials for a number of years now. Anybody have one?
I just would think that if the court said, I'll paraphrase, that the evidence you're about to hear goes to the issue of insanity and insanity alone, or words to that effect. Is that?
That would be my request.
So something simple like that would be fine.
All right, so the evidence you are about to hear goes to the issue of insanity and insanity alone?
Sounds great.
Defense.
That worked for me.
You're gonna have to give me a heads up as to when I need to give that.
It'll be before our second witness this
Okay.
morning, Dr. Christine Moore. And
Okay.
Dr. Grimmett will probably be on, I don't know if we'll get to her in the morning, but at 1:30, I would guess.
Okay. All right, we can do that. Is the anticipation that we're gonna be all day with evidence?
Well, we've got 3 witnesses lined up, Judge. It'll just depend on how long each one
Okay.
takes.
The only reason I ask is I'm trying to get I've sent an email to Judge Bain and Scott Sosby about possible weather delay. So if we have something, I may know about it beforehand, but if we don't have a full afternoon, I doubt they'll have an answer. And they may not have an answer even if we go to 5. So
Yeah, so just context-wise, there's typically when we know there's a big storm coming in, there's a phone call that happens usually 4 a.m. of the morning of the storm
Right.
that I actually participate in as well. And I haven't seen any notification of that yet. If I see that, I'll let you know as well.
Okay.
But the updated projections looks like it's going to be only in northern El Paso County, although the snow totals that I've seen have increased up from 6 to 14 inches now, as opposed to, I think it was 6 to 12 maybe yesterday.
Right.
So it sounds like potential for more snow, but more northern El Paso County.
Yeah, I know the county does county maintenance does a phone call about 9 o'clock at night, and then Judge Bain is on the phone. It's 4 or 5 in the morning.
It's usually 4 a.m.
Yeah. So, yeah. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and bring the jury in then.
And Judge, while this next witness is on the stand, I'll be running the projection from the podium here.
Okay. Okay. Okay, I'll get a show of hands and see where we are at the end. All rise for the jury, please. Thank you. May all be seated. Court will recall 20 CR 1358, People versus Letecia Stauch. Record should reflect the jury has returned to the courtroom. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Has anything occurred since we were last together that causes any of you to believe you could not continue to serve as a fair and impartial juror in this case? If so, please raise your hand. No response? All right. Prosecution, call your next witness, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. We would call Kevin Hoyland.
Last name?
Hoyland?
Hoyland. Mr. Hoyland, if you would step forward and raise your right hand, please. You swear to affirm the testimony about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Go ahead and have a seat in the witness stand. Please watch your step as you step into the stand.
Everybody's done that.
I know, it's a habit.
Good morning. How are you doing today?
Well, thank you.
Will you please introduce yourself to our jury and then spell your name for the record?
Sure. My name is Kevin, Kevin, Hoyland, Hoyland.
Where are you employed by, sir?
The FBI.
What is your job title or assignment?
I am a special agent with the FBI, assigned full-time to the Cellular Analysis Survey Team.
How long have you been in that role?
Full-time with them in that role since 2019. Prior to that, in 2016, I became a certified member of the CAST team, where I still handled investigations like you would think a traditional agent does. And then I did the CAST work on the side as an ancillary duty, no different than evidence response or SWAT team duties.
So when you say the cast team, you go around putting casts on people's broken limbs?
No. The Cellular Analysis Survey Team is a specialized group of investigators responsible for analyzing phone records provided by the phone companies to understand the general location of where a device was historically when it had made calls or texts.
What kind of education do you have that allows you to do that?
Do you mean the training to?
Sure, yeah.
So the training that I went through and everybody goes through to become certified in CAST at the time was approximately 400 hours of specific classroom instruction. That instruction came from other FBI agents, other government entities, vendors in the cellular industry, and then most importantly, CAST receives training directly from the phone companies themselves. So legal compliance, engineers from all of the major companies come to train us, come to our certification to educate us on how their network specifically works. And to my knowledge, CAST is the only unit in the country to receive training directly from those phone providers.
When you say vendors, who do you mean by that?
Companies that design tools that the carriers may use in their networks. That's primary.
Okay. And then you said companies and carriers. Are you talking about companies like AT&T, Verizon, those kind of companies?
Exactly. At the time when I went through certification, Sprint still existed, US Cellular. So all of the major providers send their engineers and subpoena compliance folks.
So what does that training look like when you get that information directly from the companies themselves?
Well, it's unique, and again, in the sense that we're the only group, to my knowledge, to receive training from them. But it's great in the sense that it allows us to formulate really close and strong relationships with the phone companies. So we know their networks inside and out. And so when we see something amiss or askew in records that we receive, we have folks that we can reach out to, bless you, and engineers that can help us, problem solve or troubleshoot something that might be unique in a set of records.
When you say that you receive records from those companies, what kind of records are we talking about?
The records that I'm referring to are call detail records. So it's really no different than a billing file or billing statements you may have received in the past. It says who called who, when that call occurred, how long it lasted. And then most importantly, the information that we receive pursuant to search warrants includes the cell tower and sector that was utilized. So That's the piece that's really important to us because that allows us, when we marry up that cell tower with its physical location on Earth, allows us to formulate an opinion as to the general location of where a device had to have been to use that particular tower.
How many people are in the cast or on the cast team?
Now there's approximately 80 of us, 60 field assets as they're called, where they split their time working in traditional cases, and then approximately 20 of us like myself who do it full time now.
What do we mean when we talk about historical cell site analysis?
So historical cell site analysis is a little bit of what I just mentioned. It's taking these records that your phone and network have generated and mapping out the information to, again, formulate an opinion as to where the phone would have generally have been to utilize a particular tower and sector. And there's, hundreds of thousands of towers across the US. Each transaction that we see shows the tower that it used. So out of those hundreds of thousands of towers, it only used one, right? And that tower's only located in one spot. So by looking at how networks are configured and where the other towers are, it allows us to be able to, again, formulate that opinion.
So when you say that you get specialized training due to your assignment to the cast team, and I know I keep saying cast and then team, that's a little bit redundant, right?
It is, and I do the same thing.
Okay.
Right? We're technically a unit now. We've grown so much that we're now considered a unit within
Okay.
the FBI.
Well, then I'll say cast unit.
Sure.
All right. What kind of training do you get regarding cell phones themselves?
Regarding the devices,
Yes.
so we don't necessarily partake in the forensic analysis of phones. So when you think of dumping a phone or extracting information from that device, that doesn't fall into our team's purview. But we definitely utilize all that information. Our team is called upon whenever there's a kidnapped child, or we need to locate a fugitive, or try and identify crime scenes that maybe were not known to investigators. There's the phone data from the phone companies. There's the phone data from a phone itself. And then there's a litany of other geolocation data sets from other companies that sort of fall into our bucket of trying to figure out where a phone was at a time.
Can you describe in a general sense, first of all, is a cell phone essentially a small handheld radio?
That's exactly what it is. So while your phone is on and in your pocket or purse or wherever, it's constantly scanning its environment, and it's looking for cell towers associated with your carrier that it sees and takes measurements of the signal strengths from those towers. And this is going on in the background, and it's constantly ranking which tower and sector is a side of a tower, that it sees as best. So that when you hit send on your phone, your call goes out to that tower that your phone saw as best at that moment in time. That's what gets logged in those call detail records. We see that tower's identifier with that timestamp. After that happens, network takes over, and it can move your phone around to other towers in the area that might provide service that still are functional. But at that moment, when you hit send or when a call comes in or a text, your phone is making that determination.
What about giving the jury a description of cellular technology?
Sure. I won't bore you with a history lesson, but I think most people have seen commercials lately. We're now on 5G. That's the newest technology. Each increment in technology expands the capacity in terms of how much data can be transferred from a phone to a tower at a particular time. But with that expansion, the offset to that is the towers themselves can't cover as far. They can't penetrate buildings as well. The radio frequency that's utilized just doesn't allow for that. So in this particular case, we were looking primarily at most of the towers were 4G. I believe there was a handful of 3G towers. But at the end of the day, that's just the generation of technology. Your phone is using radio frequency to talk to the tower, and that's sort of what's going on.
Okay. How do you go about analyzing call detail records, the information you get from the phone companies?
Well, first thing we do is, make sure we got all the files that we would expect from each particular company. And then based on information provided to me from investigators who are actually working the case, locations of interest, dates and times of interest, I would begin to map out that data look at where those cell towers are located, which cell towers that phone utilized at the times, again, listed in the records, and begin to put the pieces together as to what was going on with that particular device.
Okay. How many separate cases have you worked on where you've had to help the investigation determine location of cell phones?
Oh gosh, cases, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. I don't keep a list of all the cases I've worked, because a lot of the times it's sort of like a one-off. A local investigator will call and say, "Hey, I got a set of data. Can you help me just understand what's going on?" And that would be considered a case, but I wouldn't necessarily have done a product for it per se. It might be a one-off assistance kind of thing.
Okay. Do you go through any sort of validation of your analysis of this information?
Yes. So before any report is provided, any final report is provided, we go through a peer review process. So I send all the records that I received, that I utilized in my analysis, a copy of my draft report to another CAST person, and all the dates and times, all the information pertinent to my analysis. That CAST asset would then essentially recreate my analysis. He or she would go through and look at all the same records, make sure that everything makes sense, that all of the towers are correct, all the directions that sectors face are correct. Obviously, quality control and spelling and stuff like that. But it's a robust peer review process that all the reports go through. After that, he or she and I would then discuss any differences, right, and resolve those before it gets finalized.
Okay. Have you used this type of data you mentioned sometimes you'll be asked to look for fugitives or missing persons, kidnapped people. Have you actually used this information to locate people like that?
Yes, I have many times, and that's sort of the bread and butter of what CAST does. As I mentioned, when a kid goes missing in the middle of the night, oftentimes our unit's the one who gets the call to go help locate devices associated with whatever child is missing.
When you're saying that you're finding persons this way, the data that you actually look at, the call detail records, does it really just go to a particular phone, not a particular person necessarily?
Correct. So the records never say that, so-and-so is holding a phone at a particular time. It just says that this phone number had activity, right? So I can never say that a particular phone was being held by a certain person at a certain time, but we know that the phone had activity because that's what the network had logged.
In today's day and age, is it very common for people to carry around cell phones with them almost everywhere they go?
Yeah, I have two.
Okay. Do you have them both on you right now?
I take them off when I go on the stand. They're in the bag.
Have you trained others in this technology?
Yes, I've led formal training and classroom instruction to over 500 state, local, federal, and international law enforcement partners, and then countless sort of informal trainings at conferences and so forth over the years.
Yeah. Have you been qualified as an expert witness in historical cell site analysis, cellular technology, and geolocation?
Yes, I have.
How many times?
36 trials as of yesterday morning in Phoenix.
Okay. So you were just in Phoenix testifying yesterday?
Yes.
How many jurisdictions have you testified as an expert in?
Federally, Colorado, Wyoming, Arizona, Massachusetts, and Connecticut. At the state level, Colorado, Arizona, Wyoming, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Nebraska, North Carolina. There might be another couple in there.
Okay.
I don't recall.
All right. All right, at this time, I would move to qualify Special Agent Hoyland as an expert witness in historical cell site analysis, cellular technology, and geolocation.
No objection. Witness will be so qualified.
Special Agent Hoyland, the case that we've been hearing evidence on is regarding investigation to Gannon Stauch's disappearance. How did you become involved in this case?
At the time, I was assigned to FBI Denver's office in the Fort Collins RA, doing the same CAST work. And I don't remember who specifically reached out to me, but somebody from the Colorado Springs office reached out about the investigation and asked for my assistance.
When you get asked to assist on an investigation, is it typical for you to get sort of a briefing of the case?
Yes.
What about specific locations of interest. Do you get that as well?
Yes, and I sort of need that because there's the data that we get from the phone companies is all often quite voluminous, right? So I need a place to start.
Okay. Did you get those sorts of pieces of information in this case?
I did.
On the desk in front of you is People's Exhibit 293, which in the folder itself is page 1, your cover page of your report, and then pages 9 through 60. Pulled out separately is People's Exhibits 2 through 8. In total, is that your report that you prepared for this investigation?
Yes, it is.
Is it a fair and accurate representation as to the work that you performed in this case?
It is.
As far as People's Exhibits 2 through 8, which are pulled out, we intend to use those for demonstrative exhibits. What are those generally?
So 2 through 8 in this case is sort of our or my boilerplate slides that go into, again, how networks are designed, how phones work, and also I show examples of what the phone records look like from the different carriers.
And does it also provide some educational basis to understand how cell phones and towers interact with each other and that kind of thing?
Yes, exactly.
And then as far as your cover page and then 9 through 60 inside the binder, what are those?
So 9 through 60 are going to be all the substantive slides that I put together, which highlight, devices of travel over a period of time, locations of interest, et cetera.
Okay. As it relates to that portion of your report that's in the binder, is it a fair and accurate representation of the geolocation work and cellular historical cell site analysis and cellular technology work that you did in this case?
It is.
Now, at this time, I'd move to admit People's Exhibit 293, which is his cover page of his report, and then pages 9 through 60, which is the maps that he prepared in this case.
No objection. Exhibit 2, and that's a cumulative, right? All of that's in 293?
Yes, it's in one binder, yes.
All right. Exhibit 293 will be admitted. Go ahead.
And then as far as publishing this to the jury judge, I do think it'll be helpful to have Mr. Hoyland go over 2 through 8 pages as demonstrative exhibits just to augment his testimony.
All right.
That's fine.
And then we'll just need the TVs turned on and running from here, Judge. Thank you. So describe what we're looking at as far as on this cover page. What does this page tell us?
Just the old cover slide here talks about the case numbers, both the FBI and El Paso County ones. The date of my report was finalized in January of 21, and that it's just related to the Gannon Stauch homicide.
Okay, page 2. What does page 2 tell us?
So page 2 is sort of the beginning of some of the boilerplate slides. This is a brief overview of the investigative information, the purpose of the analysis, which again was just, as sort of discussed, I was called upon to help with the phones to try and identify where Gannon was located. And then the methodology. So briefly, I touched on that. Phones connect to towers, and that radio frequency is what is used to exchange that information from the phone to the tower. Based on the locations of those towers, which are provided by the phone companies, we can map all that out and start to see which, the locations of where towers were utilized to inform an opinion as to the general location of a device at that time.
Okay. Judge, it may be helpful. Would you mind if I turn off the ring lights? Just so.
That's fine there.
Yeah.
The 2 green dots.
Just so there's a little less glare on the. Special Agent Hoyland, at the very bottom, there's a note that says all times you're in are in the local time zone. Can you describe what you mean by that?
Sure. So all phone companies provide their records in a different time zone, which is somewhat annoying. And so in this case, we have multiple phones from multiple carriers. All the data here has been normalized. So it's an all apples to apples comparison. So anytime that you see on a map, on subsequent maps, will be that time, not any sort of time that the phone company had provided the records. And because my analysis stretches a good chunk of the US and we go from multiple time zones, just know that that is, again, always local to whatever location of the map we're looking at that time.
So if we're looking at a map that shows central time zone, it'll be local time for that central time zone.
Correct.
Okay. We're on page 3 now of your report, and this is still a demonstrative slide. Tell the jury what we're looking at in slide 3.
Sure. So similar again to what was mentioned, your phone's always looking for the tower that has the best signal, right? It's always scanning that in the background so that it's ready to go when a message comes in or you need to place a call. And that's, again, what gets logged in those call detail records. One thing to note, though, is that your phone's not always going to use the closest tower, right? It's going to use the tower it sees as best. So cleanest, clearest, and just generally best signal. So one way to think about that is imagine you're in an office building and you're standing at a window and you see a cell tower, your phone sees a cell tower a mile away. There's no obstructions, clear line of sight. Now, on the other side of that office building, maybe a half mile away, there might be another cell tower your phone sees. Your phone may choose that tower that's a little bit farther away because it provides a better signal. The radio frequency from that tower to your phone and from your phone back won't have to penetrate the rest of that office building, the concrete, the rebar, the steel, just to get out to reach that tower that's a little bit closer. So something to just keep in mind, I guess, when looking at the analysis.
Okay. Now we're on page 4. What does this one tell us?
As part of this, we also did what's known as a drive test or an RF survey, and that is gear that we have that is standard in the cellular industry that allows us to go out and measure the cell signal strengths in different spots based on antennas we have on our car and a GPS puck. And so from that, we can begin to draw the estimated boundaries of where a tower's coverage area would begin and end, and where a different tower's coverage area would start. So in a couple of slides in my report, that type of analysis is shown.
So does this mean that you're physically driving out to these locations to test the signal strength essentially from a tower?
In this case, I didn't specifically do it. I was tied up with some other stuff, so somebody else did the driving. The gear is ours. The data comes back to our server, and I analyzed it. But yes, it's a lot of right turns. You're just driving all around.
Okay. We're now on page 5 of the demonstrative exhibits. Tell the jury what we're looking at here.
So this is a slide to help you understand the concept of sectors. So as I mentioned before, not only do we receive information about which cell tower was utilized, but we also get information about the sector. So if you think of a cell tower as a 360-degree circle, most towers are broken up into 3 sectors. Not all, but most. And so each sector, if you divide 360 by 3, each sector would cover approximately 120 degrees. Where this becomes helpful for us is, imagine behind me, the phone was utilizing that tower. I guess I don't have a laser pointer, but the one at the top, sector 1.
There's actually an extender pointer up there, an old school pointer, telescoping. Even though you're talking about technology
Old
advances,
school
we like
indeed.
the old school method.
Yeah. So that one. So imagine a phone's using that tower and sector. Well, we know that the phone is not going to be down here, right? Because it would choose that sector. And it wouldn't be down here because it would choose that sector, right? So it helps us better narrow down the location or general location of a device relative to that tower. And again, all of this information is provided by the phone companies. They're the ones who decide which direction these towers face, because they don't all face 0, 120, and 240. Each sector can face however they want to configure it. But it's this additional information that really helps us narrow down on our analysis.
On page 6 of the demonstrative exhibits, tell the jury what's depicted here.
Sure. The big takeaway on this one is this pie wedge looking thing up on the top. That is how we reflect the sector that was utilized for a tower or for a phone when it utilized a tower and a sector. So you'll see that sort of pie wedge shape all over my reports. The other thing that's important on this is don't mistake that little yellow filled in area as the coverage area. That's not what it is. It's merely to help you understand the direction that pie wedge faces.
Okay. Now we're on page 7. Tell the jury what we're looking at here.
So in this case, this slide, this is just an example of some Verizon call detail records. As I had mentioned before, these are really just billing statements, right? It just shows your phone's activity. But off to the right, you start to see, and I guess I'll keep going back to the pointy thing. You got your cell sites listed there. And it shows first serving cell site, first serving cell face. So that's the cell number that Verizon assigned to the tower utilized. And then the cell face, 1, 2, 3, sometimes it's, 4, 5, 6. But nonetheless, that's the information that we take. And then we marry that up with a tower list from Verizon. So Verizon says, here's where all of our towers are by the numbers given here. So we can go ahead and take the latitude and longitudes for, in this case, first serving cell site 285. We could go to that tower list and say, oh, 285. Well, that is right here on the Earth. It used sector 3. Oh, sector 3 faces southwest. Okay, well, we know that the phone was generally southwest of that tower at that point, that moment in time. Yeah.
Is it common that, say, I get on a call outside of the courthouse here this morning and I walk down Tejon for a couple of miles? Would it be common for my phone to switch towers while I'm on that call?
Yes, your phone should at least hand off to other towers. When, imagine your call drops in the middle of that, what happened there is the network didn't have proper overlap between towers, right? The coverage area from one tower didn't properly overlap with the coverage area of the next tower. So there was a gap. And when there's a gap, your phone disconnects or drops the call. In this particular instance and how we analyze the records, we traditionally just use the first serving cell site at that moment, because again, that's the moment the phone initiated contact with the network. The phone is making that determination. All of those handoffs to other towers are network derived. So the network says, oh, okay, I'm going to move you over here now, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Also, not every carrier provides that information. AT&T is the only one who actually provides handoff info.
Okay.
And one more thing on the Verizon.
Yeah.
Verizon only provides us the cell tower information for phone calls. It does not provide it for text messages. And so, there's somewhat of a gap there. We see the text messages, we see when they occur, but we don't see the cell tower associated with them.
Does a text message access the cell tower the same way a phone call does?
It does.
Okay. And then now we're on page 8 of the demonstrative exhibits. Tell the jury what's depicted here.
So somewhat of the eyesore behind me is the AT&T records. So all the carriers provide their records in slightly different format. AT&T likes to provide it in PDF and a text file, where everyone else uses Excel. But suffice to say, it doesn't really matter what format the data comes in, because at the end of the day, every carrier is saying the same thing. This phone number utilized this tower and sector at this date and time for a call or a text or whatever it might be. So the headers, the format, how it's laid out, somewhat irrelevant. All that information is available to us to do our analysis.
Okay. Now we're on to page 9 of your report, and this actually is now getting into the admitted exhibit. What is the purposes of the information contained here on page 9?
So on page 9, we have a lot of the different devices that I was asked to look at in this case. So the first 4 are different cell phones, and you see the number, it's in the selector column behind me. Those are the phone numbers associated with those devices. I have the associated party, the provider of those cellular service, and then the map icon on the far right. So whenever I'm showing activity for Gannon's phone, it's going to be the red pie wedge. Letecia's had a phone with AT&T as well as Verizon. For consistency, I just made them both blue. It'll be very clear in my analysis when that changes. Harley Hunt's device was also an AT&T, that's gray. Then the bottom 4 are additional geolocation data sets that we were able to obtain. So there was information gleaned from a Volkswagen Tiguan. Those are going to show up as a yellow marker on my reports. There was a rental car, a rental cargo van, I should say, that the rental company had GPS data associated with it. You'll see that in green, as well as a separate rental car where a GPS tracker had been placed on it. That's also in green. And then lastly, there was an application known as Life 360 that was on Letecia's device, one of Letecia's devices. So we received information from Life 360 that also was able to be mapped out and is highlighted by that pink icon at the bottom. So there's a legend on each of my maps. Don't feel like you need to memorize this, but you're going to see a lot of colors and a lot of moving parts on some of these subsequent slides.
And just for the record, as we're looking at page 9 of this report, item A, which is 843-504-6724, the records for that were admitted under Exhibit 708. Item B, which is 843-655-7460, was admitted as Exhibit 704. Item C, which is 407-375-3463, was admitted as Exhibit 706. Item D, 843-957-3486, was admitted as Exhibit number 707. The Tiguan telematics, which is item E, was admitted as Exhibit number 291. The cargo van GPS was admitted through Mr. Watton's testimony and is Exhibit number 292. The Nissan Altima GPS tracker was admitted through testimony from El Paso County Sheriff's detectives, and it was Exhibit number 230. And then finally, the Life 360 data under line H, 843-655-7460, was admitted as Exhibit number 705. All right, let's go on to page 10. What does page 10 depict and tell us?
So as part of the returns from the phone companies, they traditionally provide subscriber information. So in this case, for the phone associated with Gannon, AT&T was the service provider. It was subscribed to Eugene Stauch at the address given in Colorado Springs. And then just the data mine analysis with this particular phone was from January 26th of 2020 through January 28th of 2020.
Okay. And then on page 11, what are we looking at here?
Again, same information. This is for Letecia's phone ending in 7460, also with AT&T. Also subscribed to under Eugene's account.
When it shows that the subscriber information is under Eugene Stauch, but you indicate that this is associated with Letecia Stauch, is that based off of information you get from the investigative agency giving you information about who is associated with each individual phone number?
It is, because again, the records don't tell me who's holding the phone per se, right? But through that, I learned that this number was primarily used by Letecia.
Okay. And then now on page 12, what does this one tell us?
This is the secondary phone that we came to learn about associated with Letecia. This is a Verizon phone ending in 3463. The subscriber information was listed as a Kylie Britt in Orlando, Florida, with an effective date of February 1st of 2020. And this was a prepaid device. Right? So not one where a monthly bill shows up. This is you can go by minutes whenever you want kind of thing.
Did you have information from the investigation that this was a phone that was purchased by the defendant at a Walmart in Trinidad?
I did.
Okay. Page 13, what does this one tell us?
This is the phone that was associated with Arlie Hunt, number 3486, again, AT&T, and also subscribed to under the Eugene Stauch account.
Page 14.
So these are the other 4 data sets that we saw previously on my sort of summary slide of the selectors. So it just goes into a little bit more detail. The Tiguan telematics data that was extracted by our OTD shop. The cargo van that was rented by Letecia from Budget. Their vendor was Air IQ, and while it wasn't breadcrumb trail type GPS where you can see it going every couple seconds. Every 6 hours, it was set to essentially ping the vehicle. Where is this vehicle located right now? There was a Nissan rental car, which didn't have, to my knowledge, any sort of GPS built into it, but a tracker was attached to that by the Colorado Springs Police Department. And then lastly, the Life 360 app. So an app on your phone sources the data, sources the GPS of your device and reports it back to Life 360 so that, you know, they sort of know where you are, you know where your family members are, if you have a shared plan. That information was provided to us. That account was associated with a user of Letecia Stauch, email Tisha Lynn 2006 at Yahoo, and then the same phone number as her AT&T device.
When you were talking about the Tiguan telematics, you said the OTD shot with the FBI. What does OTD mean?
Operations Technology Division.
Is that in Quantico, Virginia?
It is.
Okay. We're on page 15. Tell the jury what we're looking at here.
So for the first 5 days of my report, there was a variety of locations of interest that were provided to me, as shown here. They all don't show up, of course, on every single slide. As we go through the maps, the ones of relevance I will have populated, so I won't necessarily bore everyone with going through it one by one, but suffice to say, the icons on the right will appear on some of my subsequent slides with the description of what that location is.
And are these locations things that you just pull out of thin air?
No, these were locations, again, that the investigative team had provided to me as locations of interest for my analysis.
Okay. Now we're on page 16. What are we looking at here?
All right. So a little bit busy, so I'm going to take a few seconds to sort of walk everyone through what's going on. You see in the top right, there's a legend, right? So whenever we're looking at a map, everyone's going to have a legend. It's going to tell you all the key sort of pieces going on the slide. So we have the Stauch residence, which is in the bottom right, the little icon that has the house on it. We then have the pink Life 360 markers, which you see sort of walk us from the house up to the Garden of the Gods. The yellow is the Volkswagen Tiguan telematics data, which I just mentioned, and that and the Life 360 data sort of follows a very similar path. And then we have the cellular records. All right, so in this case, we have AT&T records, this call out box here. So at on January 26, 2020, at 11:15, Letecia's device received an incoming text message, a system-generated short code, which is those 5 digits off to the right. And it utilized that tower and sector down there that faces in the direction of the Stauch residence. So when we look at this call-out box, and we'll see many of them, you've got the phone number associated with the record, and it's color coordinated. So you may see a call-out box that has like 3 or 4 different phones all at the same time. Each phone will be color-coded based on the actual user. Then we see the timestamp, again in local time. Whether or not it was an incoming text, an outgoing text, incoming call, outgoing call, that's all going to be listed next. In this case, the 110 is the direction that sector faces. So 110 degrees is, if you think of a clock, roughly like 4 o'clock. And you can see that that's how that's drawn. So 110 degrees from the center of it. But when taken in totality, we see that at approximately 2 o'clock, the Tiguan and the Life 360 information supports that this device and the car are traveling away from the residence up to the Garden of the Gods. At 2:56, we see Letecia's phone, and it's sort of buried under that. This might be easier to see here. You see that Letecia's phone uses that tower and sector to receive 2 text messages. The other thing, just to note on this, so these other blue dots here, those are the other AT&T towers in the area that her phone didn't utilize during this period in time. But all told, again, consistent with Letecia's phone traveling from her house up to the Garden of the Gods during the time frame shown on the 26th.
Is it helpful to know that other things happened that sort of corroborate the same information, other ways to verify that there was a visit to Garden of the Gods.
Yeah, obviously, the more corroboration you have of a data point, the better.
Okay. And then as far as your analysis on this, is this the first time on that day, Sunday, January 26th, that the Tiguan left the 6627 Mandan Drive based on your analysis?
I believe it was.
Okay. And so if we've had some prior testimony that there was hiking in a selfie taken at Garden of the Gods on January 26th, that would corroborate this, what shows a visit of the defendant in her Tiguan and using her cell phone up at Garden of the Gods.
I would say so, because you have the Tiguan, the yellow dots sort of terminate right there. But then the Life 360 points sort of continue off of and away from the Tiguan. This would support the theory that the car was parked and then people got out and walked. And then obviously there was the 2 incoming text messages, as I mentioned before.
The fact that there was a selfie taken on the defendant's phone showing herself and Gannon and a little girl named Lena that was on her phone, does that also corroborate that she was actually in possession of this phone?
Without a doubt.
Now we're on page 17. What are we looking at here?
So in this instance, during from approximately 4:20 to 4:46, we see Tiguan and Life 360 data sort of reverse paths, right? And there was no cell phone activity during this time that was mappable. So we're left with this. But again, you see the path of travel that the device and the vehicle take back to the Stauch residence.
Okay. And then on page 18, what are we looking at?
So at 5:08 that same evening on January 26th, the Life 360 app recorded a variety of points consistent with a path of travel as I show here. So leaves the house, goes down here, you got an activity at 5:14, 5:22, you've got another data point a little bit farther east, and then the next one back there at 5:26. So sort of a quick jaunt away from the house, and then back in 15 minutes or so. And then at 5:27, and then again at 5:48, that device, Life 360 recorded locations of that device back at the house. There wasn't any AT&T activity. There wasn't any Tiguan telematics activity during this time. But there was, from the Cellbrite, or a dump of the information on Letecia's phone, conversations that she had had with Harley via iMessage at 5:11 and 5:13, mentioning she was out getting food because Gannon had had an accident in his pants. Now, the important thing here to understand about iMessage is if anybody has an iPhone, when you send a message to another iPhone user, it doesn't show up as a traditional text message. It goes over the data side of the network. So we'll never see that message in the log of texts for Letecia's device. Only traditional text messages or iMessages that fail and have to be sent as an SMS would show up in her text messages.
You used a SMS. What does that mean? Just so the record's clear.
Short message service. It's the name for a text.
And then MMS you mentioned also. What is that?
Multimedia service. That would be like a picture message.
Okay. The fact that there's no Tiguan telematics data here, does that indicate that the defendant likely drove a different vehicle besides the Tiguan?
It would support that, yes.
Okay. Page 19. Now, what are we looking at?
So after that 5:48 event, we don't really have much during the next 4 hours. So at 9:27, 9:28, 9:35, there's some Life 360 activity as shown here. And then at 10:19 p.m., Letecia's device placed an outgoing call using the towered sector facing back towards the residence to the AT&T customer service number.
the fact that you've got the two entries at 928 and 935 basically at the house, and then there's that one 927 that's sort of kicked out southwest away from the house. Does that tell us anything necessarily?
Yeah, when I looked at the totality of the Life 360 data, it seemed to track quite closely with other stuff, and we didn't see really much derivation from expected paths of travel. So, if I was, looking at this data sort of live, I would have expected that the phone would have not been at the residence, but instead would have been somewhere outside it, south of it.
Okay. And then are we still talking about Sunday, January 26th in this slide?
Yes, sorry, we are now evening of Sunday, January 26th.
Okay. Now we're on page 20. What are we looking at here?
Sure. So this is the first of a couple slides that is the drive testing I mentioned. So the way we go out and map the coverage areas of a particular tower, and it's not the full coverage area. The area could extend in certain areas beyond it where we can't drive. So if you look off to like the bottom right, there's certain areas where there's no roads. We can't go out there to do our drive testing. But what we can see on the roads that we do drive, is that this particular tower and sector provides coverage back towards the location of the Stauch residence. And so if a device was at that residence, I would expect it to utilize this tower and sector for any of its calls or texts or anything.
And is this going to be the main tower that is used for connection throughout this presentation for the Stauch residents?
Yes, this tower is utilized over and over again by all the AT&T devices when we have corroborating evidence to support that they're at the residence.
Okay. Now into slide 21. What are we looking at here?
Sure. So the taking a little bit step back in time, we're now back into the early afternoon on January 26th, but this is Harley's AT&T device. And you see it 2:41 and at 3:10, her phone is utilizing two different cell towers facing the Massage Envy area or business. Prior to that, at 1:48, her phone had placed an outgoing call using that same tower and sector we just looked at. That was facing the Stauch residence. So this would be consistent with her device being near the Stauch residence at 1:48, and then clearly traveling up sometime between then, where it first utilized a tower near Massage Envy at 2:41. After that, there was two more incoming calls at 7:35 through that same tower off to the left. So consistent with her being there, and she also had clocked out of work at 10:18 that evening.
So that's what I was going to ask you, and you just hit it. Would this basically corroborate testimony that we had previously that she was at work from basically 2 until 10 roughly p.m.?
Yes, it would.
Okay. And again, is this on Sunday, January 26th?
Yes, it is.
Slide 22, what are we looking at here?
So we've now migrated to the morning of January 27th, and we see both Letecia and Harley's devices utilizing the tower and sector that faces the Stauch residence. So Harley's entry, she only has one. It's at 2:40. There's an outgoing text message, which was system generated. And then at 4:46 a.m. through 8:42 a.m., you see a bunch of activity from Letecia's device. A lot of outgoing text messages, incoming calls, etc. So when we looked at the Cellbrite for Letecia's phone, we see that she sent a message to Albert at 2:48 related to Gannon feeling ill. Again, that was an iMessage, so it's not going to show up in our logs here, right? It's not going to show up as a traditional text message. Subsequent to that, there was then at 4:36, you see some messages to her employer saying that her stepfather had passed away and she wouldn't be coming into work that day. At 8:18, as you can see, as I've written here, the last known photo of Gannon was sent to Albert, showing him lying in bed. Again, all of this activity is utilizing that tower and sector facing the residence. This would be consistent with her device being at that residence for the duration of that time, or at least when these messages were sent and received. And then lastly, in terms of chronological order, Harley was listed as clocking into work at 8:30 that morning.
And so just so we're clear, when we're looking at the box with the different activity, the blue box there, you mentioned that Harley's is listed in gray. Will you just stand up and point to that specific thing just so that we're all tracking with the same thing? And so that would corroborate with your key up at the top where Harley's phone activity is listed in gray as well, right?
Exactly. So all of Harley's stuff is going to show up as gray. All of Letecia's phone activity is blue. Gannon's is going to be red.
In the time span for this particular slide, just so you were saying 2:40 and 4:36, we're talking about early morning hours, AM hours.
Yes,
And this is the morning of January 27th, is that right?
that is correct.
Moving on to 23, what are we looking at there?
So we're continuing on now, still in the morning of January 27th. There was another iMessage sent at 9:54 saying that she was leaving her phone. This is Letecia saying that she was leaving her phone and to be contacted via Gannon's Apple iWatch, which is paired, or sorry, to be contacted on her Apple iWatch paired with Gannon's device. When we looked at some surveillance video, we see that that Albert's truck leaves the residence. It's written over it, but around
10:13.
10:13. Thank you. There's a lot of info I couldn't memorize at all. And then at 1:22, we see Letecia on surveillance video at Petco. The Albert's truck then returns based on surveillance at 2:20. And there's no Life 360 app data available because, again, Letecia left her phone at home. She only took her Apple iWatch. So when we look at the activity from Letecia's AT&T phone, we see beginning at 10:39 local time and stretching well past when the truck returns, all that activity is inbound, again, supporting the idea that her phone was left at home. None of the calls appear to have been transferred to Letecia's Apple iWatch. So, yeah.
Okay. People's exhibit, or I'm sorry, page 24 of this exhibit. What are we looking at there?
So again, same sort of time frame, but now we're looking at just Gannon's phone. What had happened with Gannon's phone? So we've been talking about voice and text data or informations thus far. AT&T also has data sessions. When we have voice and text, we traditionally use just that. Data sessions require a different level of sort of investigation to validate and confirm accuracy and reliability. And so in situations where we don't see text messages, we don't see phone calls, sometimes we'll use data sessions. And that's what I did in this case with Gannon's device. So you see his phone again in red. At 10:19, he has two data sessions open up off of the tower and sector that faces the Stauch residence. You see some of the towers that his phone utilizes along the way. I don't have the timestamps for those, but I jump up here to at 11:07, a data session near the Petco. Then at 1:19, and then again at 1:20, there's another data session off the tower and sector there at Petco. One thing to keep in mind with the data sessions is when they open up, they may stay open for as long as 60 minutes. And so it's not, again, a transactional kind of record wherein we'll see every iMessage back and forth. We'll see every time that person goes out and surfs the web and this associated cell tower. That kind of granularity doesn't exist in the data. It's just that the data session opened up at this date and time, may have been open for up to an hour. What happened during that hour, we can't specifically say. But in this instance, it's consistent with the idea that Gannon's device moved from the residence up towards the PetSmart Petco area. When we looked at the forensic analysis of Gannon's device, we see that the Safari mobile app was used at 11:12 a.m., and then there was no more activity till 1:20. There was an iMessage received on his device at 12:06, which indicates that his device was on, and at least connected to some sort of Wi-Fi or cellular, in this case, likely cellular. Sorry, I just lost my thought here. At that 12:06, that's when the message was sent. But it wasn't actually reviewed or viewed by somebody holding Gannon's phone until 1:20 that afternoon. So roughly an hour and 15 minutes after it was sent, it actually, somebody opened up iMessage and looked at that message.
Okay. And so again, similar to what I've asked in the past on some of these other slides, the last two, page 23 and 24, outside sources that show that this is valid information. You mentioned the trip and departures on neighborhood surveillance cameras, like Ring doorbell cameras. Did that corroborate them leaving at basically the same time that we're looking at in these two pictures?
Yes, it does.
And then you mentioned surveillance video at Petco up on North Nevada showing the defendant and the red pickup being there at that same time. Also, does that corroborate and show that this information is valid?
It does, yes.
On page 25, what are we looking at here?
Still on this January 27th date, early afternoon time frame, we're looking at 12:18 through 4:25. But this is specific to just Harley's device. So you see Massage Envy, you see the three towers that her phone recorded activity through during that period in time. She was recorded as clocking into work at 8:30 that morning. And then at 4:15, she had clocked out, and shortly thereafter, she was seen returning to the residence.
And does this slide validate the testimony that Harley Hunt was at work and not at the 6627 Mandan Drive during these hours?
It would, yes.
And this is Monday, January 27th?
Correct.
And let me go back to page 24 and 23. Essentially, does this basically, these two slides show that Letecia's phone and Gannon's phone leave the residence in the morning hours and then return to the residence at roughly 2:20 in the afternoon?
Well, we don't see Letecia's phone actually leave. So Letecia's phone stays at the residence the whole time. What we do see is that Gannon's device leaves and goes up to the PetSmart. Her Apple Watch, we don't have any sort of geolocation data to ascertain where it was at any particular point in time.
And then that same, though, information, Gannon's phone showing them arriving back is corroborated by other surveillance video in the neighborhood?
That is, yes, correct.
Okay. And then moving on to page 26 of the exhibit, what are we looking at here?
So that evening of the 27th, we see in this call out box, we have three different colors, right? We have gray, which is Harley's activity. We have blue, which is Letecia's activity. And we have red, which is Gannon's phone activity. So beginning at 6:38 through 6:58, Letecia has a variety of outgoing calls, including a phone call at 6:55 to 911. Again, using the tower, and all three of those phones are all using the tower and sector facing the residence. At 7:31, and then again at 7:32, Gannon's device places an outgoing call to the same number ending in 6679. There was significant vehicle activity based on surveillance that we observed. And then at 8:05, Albert, who was not present, contacted the El Paso County Sheriff's Office as well. So again, this would be consistent with Letecia's device being at this, in and around the residence from 6:38 through 8 o'clock. Harley had three calls, all outgoing at 7:01, 7:02, and 7:02 as well. And then there was a smattering of Life 360 activity on Letecia's device, placing it in and around the residence at 6:52 through 6:59.
You make note on there that the Letecia's phone called 911 at 6:55 p.m., right?
That's correct.
And then you also make note that there are two outgoing calls from Gannon's phone at 7:31 and 7:32 p.m. If Letecia is calling 911 and reporting Gannon as being missing at that 6:55 p.m., is it likely that it's not Gannon using the phone at 7:31?
Yes, that would make logical sense.
Okay. Page 27 of this exhibit. What are we looking at here?
Yeah, so from 8 p.m. on the evening of the 27th through 6:19 a.m. the morning of January 28th, 2020, Letecia's phone had 65 65 different calls or texts utilizing the two towers shown here. 64 of them went through the tower and sector facing the house. An incoming call at 5 a.m. was off the tower and sector just south. Additionally, Gannon's device had a variety of incoming calls, text messages, outgoing calls, again, utilizing the tower and sector shown there. The El Paso County Sheriff's Office was physically present at that residence from 10:09 p.m. through 11:39 p.m. on the evening of the 27th. But you can see, again, the variety of activity sort of throughout the night for those devices.
And is this basically showing Monday, January 27th, nighttime hours into Tuesday, January 28th?
It is, yes.
And then again, similar to the last slide that we were just looking at, the fact that Gannon's phone is showing activity, even though he'd been reported as missing 6:55 p.m. on the 27th, is it also likely that it's not Gannon using the phone at this particular point?
Yes, because some of the calls that occur are during the period, when the police officers or the sheriff's office is there.
And some of these are outgoing, meaning somebody's actually physically manipulating the phone.
Correct.
Page 28, what are we looking at here?
So on this slide, we're in the early morning hours of January 28th. And at 6:21, Tisha's device sends an outbound text message utilizing the tower and sector, again, facing the residence. Around that same minute, the Tiguan is seen on surveillance video leaving the residence. When we look at the Life 360 app data, we see 6:24, data point there, 6:25, and it's 6:27 up here, a little bit north of the house. At 6:27, her phone also receives an incoming text message through that tower and sector there, the same number that she had recently just texted about 6 minutes prior. After that, we see the Life 360 app data come back south. 6:28, 6:30, 6:31, back at the residence. At 6:40, Letecia's device receives an incoming call through that same tower and sector facing the residence. And then surveillance video also shows her, or shows at least the Tiguan backing into the garage at 6:36. So what it appears to have happened is that her device left in the Tiguan, got a little bit north, for some reason turned around and returned back to the house.
Did her device grow legs and go up there by itself?
I've never seen that.
Okay. Page 29, what are we looking at here?
So as you can see, 6:43 to 8:11 a.m., both Letecia and Gannon's phones have a variety of activity, incoming, outgoing calls through the tower and sector facing the residence. 2 out of the 3 calls with Gannon's device were outgoing at this time.
And we're talking about January 28th now?
Yes, still on the 28th, morning of the 28th.
So that would be Tuesday morning?
Yes.
Is this basically showing that both of these phones are at the Stauch residence with no departures, at least as we can tell by phone activity?
Yeah, it would nothing to indicate that these phones had left the sort of the general area of where the house is, for sure.
Okay. Page 30, what's on page 30?
So at 8:13, we have a Life 360 app marker just west of the house, along with some Tiguan data starting to show up. We have some calls, 8:16, or texts and calls at 8:16. We have some more texts and calls, 8:21, 8:25, and then a call incoming at 8:34 utilizing a tower at the Colorado Springs Airport. And based on the imagery there of the Tiguan locations and Life 360 app locations, it would be consistent with the device and the vehicle both traveling to Colorado Springs Airport, arriving somewhere between 8:27 and 8:31. At 8:25, Letecia had sent Albert a text, and he had responded 4 minutes later, saying that he had just landed, asking if he was still going to pick her, asking if she was still picking him up. And then subsequently, during a search of the Tiguan, a parking receipt was found at 8:28. The last data point for the Tiguan for this day is at 8:31 that morning. So for the rest of January 28th, we don't have any more Tiguan data.
Okay. And then as it relates to this particular slide, the cell towers that you have indicated here, they have little red numbers in a circle. What is that all about?
Sometimes when we have lots of data, our maps get busy, and sometimes it's hard to make everything fit. So all these refer to is the corresponding cell tower. And so it's just like a visual to help you identify that, this call out box here is associated with this tower that has the 3. The actual cell number itself is that CID number after it, but that's all it is just to help you vector into which tower we're talking about.
And so does this also corroborate the idea that Mr. Stauch flew into the Colorado Springs Airport on this Tuesday, January 28th, and the defendant picked him up at that airport roughly at the same time?
It does.
And Judge, just thinking ahead as far as break, what do you want me to shoot for as far as?
It's your call. If another 10 minutes or so would be better, but if we need one now, it's okay too.
No, we'll go another 10 minutes. Thanks. Page 31, what are we looking at here?
Page 31. Still that morning, January 28th. So following the slide that we just looked at 8:48, and again at 9 o'clock as shown up here, and through 8:45 through 9:02, Letecia's device is utilizing this tower and sector and has a bunch of Life 360 app hits there. We learned that that Letecia had rented a Kia Rio from the airport around this time and picked up Albert at approximately 8:50 that morning. And when we continue to look at the cell tower usage and the Life 360 app data, we see that her phone travels south away from the airport, returning back to the Stauch residence at approximately roughly 9:15. When we looked through her phone dump, Letecia's phone dump, we saw that she had sent an iMessage to Harley minutes prior to picking up Albert, asking Harley to move the Jetta into the garage. And then surveillance again shows the Kia arriving back at around 9:15.
And so does this slide basically corroborate the idea that the defendant left her Tiguan someplace and then now is mobile in the Kia rental vehicle that was rented at the airport?
That's correct.
And so now we don't have any Tiguan data anymore. We're just looking at Life 360 data and any cell phone activity.
That's correct.
Okay. And again, is this Tuesday, January 28th in the morning hours?
It is.
Page 30. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I cut you off?
No,
Okay.
no, I'm good.
Page 32. What are we looking at here?
So a little bit, a few minutes later, 9 o'clock hour, 9:37 to 11:44. Again, Tuesday the 28th. You see the activity shown here. So from 9:37 through 10:55, Letecia's device utilized that tower and sector for a variety of calls and texts. But we also see, beginning at 11:01, some Life 360 data. And we see that data continue up until 11:44, where it puts her device near French Elementary. As you can see, there was a tower that was utilized at 11:30 all the way up there for an incoming call. Also sort of supporting the theory that her phone had traveled away from the residence. And also as part of her trip, we see that her phone, based on the Life 360 data, sort of stops here at a strip mall for about 25 minutes before continuing northward.
And just so we're understanding how the Life 360 works, does that app essentially just drop breadcrumbs as it's moving along, or why are we seeing so much activity on the Life 360 and maybe not necessarily as much phone activity?
Well, the phone activity isn't going to be GPS derived, right? The phone activity is only going to occur when there's activity on the phone, when somebody's making or receiving calls or texts. The data sessions are aside from that, and that's not mapped here with Letecia's. The Life 360 app, though, its purpose is so that you know where your family members are, right? And so it's sourcing and harvesting that GPS. It also uses Wi-Fi and Bluetooth based on what they have on their website. But it's recording that information and storing it so that you can look and see where your son or daughter had been, or where somebody in your family might be. So that's their business model. They need to record a lot more precise location data than what we would see from a traditional phone record.
Okay. Moving on to page 33, what are we looking at here?
So beginning at noon, Letecia's device receives an incoming call through that tower and sector that's actually sitting right under the French Elementary tower or location. At 12:07, again, more Life 360 app data begins to show that device traveling south. At 1 o'clock, we see, let me take a step back. At 12:24 through 1:14, you see in that box up there, that's associated with this tower here. There's a variety of activity from her phone using the tower and sector facing the residence. So, bless you. A little after 1 o'clock, we see Letecia's device travel away from the residence based on the Life 360 app. And we see at approximately 1:30, it stops near a Starbucks. That is where Letecia ended up being interviewed by the sheriff's office. And following that, and we also see some phone calls right in the box there off of that tower and sector facing Starbucks at 1:40 and then 2:23. And then more Life 360 app data brings that phone back to the area of the residence at approximately 2:45.
So does this show basically at that 12:07 traveling from the residence up towards French Elementary, what you have indicated with an FE on the map, correct?
This would be travel away from French Elementary.
Okay, but showing being up by French Elementary and then coming back towards the residence and then going to the Starbucks for that interview with sheriff's office personnel and then back to the residence.
That is correct.
Okay. Page 34, what are we looking at there?
So afternoon of Tuesday the 28th at 3:06 through 3:45, we have some activity here off of the tower and sector again, facing the Stauch residence. Sorry, so 4:07, 4:17, and then 4:25. So all of that activity taking place there. At 4:25, we see the Life 360 app data begin to move away from the residence up north. Letecia's device, the Life 360 app records a data point right off Route 21 at 4:32, a little bit inside the airport area. At 4:50, we see Life 360 right there, back on Route 21, along with an outgoing call through that tower and sector adjacent to it. And then at 5 o'clock, the Life 360 data puts Letecia's device, that northern section of the airport. Yeah, and the call at 4:51 was to Albert's device.
So if we had prior testimony that Al was at the sheriff's office at roughly this 4:20-ish timeframe on this particular day on January 28th, this shows the defendant traveling separate from Al, who would be at the sheriff's office.
Yes, that's correct.
And then where the AP marker is up there, is that essentially obviously it's the Avis car rental, but is that the airport, Colorado Springs Airport?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And then page 35, what are we looking at there?
Now, beginning at 518 and 538, and then you see an outgoing call from Letecia's device off the tower and sector facing Massage Envy. There's a decent amount of activity from her device in and around that Massage Envy area. Following that, Life 360 data brings Letecia's device southward from Massage Envy back towards the residence. You can see the multitude of incoming and outgoing calls that she made and the different towers that she utilized. But at 5:56 and 5:57, she used that tower and sector facing the residence. And between 5:55 and 5:59, that Life 360 data puts her device in and around that area of the residence.
Okay. And again, is this still that same Tuesday, January 28th?
It is, yes.
Okay. Judge, this might be a good time to take our break.
All right. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will take our morning break. If I can have everyone back in the jury room at say 10:35, we should be able to start on time at that point. Again, don't discuss the case among yourselves. Don't discuss the case with anyone else. Don't do your own investigation about any aspect of the case. With that, we'll see you back in about 15 minutes or so. All rise for the jury, please. I think you may all be seated. Mr. Hoyland, you can step down if you would like to.
Thank you.
All right, we'll be in recess. Thank you.
All rise.
Just so you're aware, Judge, I think Mr. Hoyland is Mr. Tellini's witness, so probably can't get started until Mr. Tellini gets back.
Okay.
Oh, perfect. No, no, no.
Yeah.
I was just mentioning that
Nice
this is
little
your
line.
witness.
Agent Hoyland, if you would resume
you
your
good,
seat,
man?
the witness stand, to remind you, sir, that you're still under oath.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, is there anything we need to take up outside the presence of the jury at this point in time? Prosecution? Mr. Tellini? Okay, go ahead and bring the jury in.
Sometimes the jury won't go back.
All rise for the jury, please. Thank you. You may all be seated. Court will recall 20 CR 1358 versus Letecia Stauch. Record should reflect the jury has returned to the courtroom. When we took our break, we were in the midst of Agent Hoyland's testimony. That's where we will resume. Mr. Allen.
Thank you, Judge. We had just talked about page 35 of the exhibit, Special Agent Hoyland. We're going to move on to page 36. What are we looking at here?
Sure. So to orient everybody, we are still on Tuesday, January 28th. We're in the evening. So you see over here in this call out box at 6 o'clock, there's an incoming call to Letecia's device using the tower and sector facing the residence. Subsequent to that, her Life 360 data brings her phone south towards that Starbucks that we had previously mentioned where she had done an interview. During that time, her device sent some iMessages back and forth with Albert and Harley's phones. Subsequent to that, the device returns back into the area and utilizes the tower and sector facing the residence, 635 through 638. You see at 643, it now uses the north-facing sector, as denoted by that 350 degrees right there. 643, 43, and 644, using that tower and sector. Life 360 data continues to bring Letecia's device northward, terminating at the airport parking lot at 649.
Moving on to page 37. What are we looking at here?
So the yellow identifiers are the Tiguan, right? So the Tiguan now has some new data for us. We're still on that evening of the 28th. Beginning at 7 o'clock, there's Life 360 and Tiguan data at the airport. There's some phone activity off of the towers there. You got 703, and then you got 726. Letecia's phone is using that tower and sector farther north near Falcon. In conjunction with that, the Tiguan data shows that vehicle leaving the airport and also heading north towards Falcon. The Life 360 data terminated at 7:14, so all we had was the vehicle data after that during this period. Harley's phone during this time was utilizing the tower and sector down near the residence, which is obviously not shown on this map. This is just Letecia's phone.
Okay, so just to orient, we're talking again about Tuesday, January 28th. Is that right? And I ask you right when you're taking a sip of water.
Sorry, I should have known. I knew the question wasn't going to be long.
Yeah.
Yes, you are correct. Evening of January 28th.
And roughly, I think the first entry that we have on this particular page is 6:51 p.m. Is that right?
It is, again, using a tower and sector for Letecia. There's an outgoing call, two outgoing calls off of that tower and sector just southwest of the airport, facing back towards the airport.
So this would be roughly 24 hours after a phone call was made on Letecia's phone to 911 on January 27th.
That's correct, yes.
And then the 7:00 p.m. entries at AP, the Avis car rental, is that again in the airport parking lot area?
It is, yes.
Does this indicate travel to the airport in that Kia rental and then getting into the Tiguan, and now we're seeing Tiguan data again?
I guess I don't know. I don't recall anyone telling me how Letecia's device made it to the airport, but we clearly see the Tiguan now, powered up and leaving the airport and heading north towards Falcon.
So either a vehicle swap or walk to the airport or something like that, and then Tiguan access from that point forward.
Correct.
Okay. And what is up? You may or may not know this, but in that Falcon area, is there a shopping center up in that area where it terminates at 7:27 p.m.?
Yeah, I remember looking at that when we were early on in this investigation, still looking for Gannon. And when I looked at Google Earth, it appears there was some sort of strip mall shopping center area near that intersection.
Were you aware of any search efforts being conducted based on this type of information? So like this area in the Falcon area, search efforts being conducted there in dumpsters and that sort of thing?
I do recall hearing about some search efforts there because it was sort of our last data point, right? We use whatever information we have. If that's the last point, then maybe something happened there.
Okay. Moving on to page 38, what are we looking at here?
So the same evening, so following that last call, there wasn't any other AT&T activity until 12:53. And based on looking at the records, her phone was disconnected from the AT&T network at that point. And I can say that with some certainty because we don't see any other data sessions or any other things going on that we would traditionally see with her phone if it was active and connected to the network. So placed in airplane mode or turned off would be the two primary reasons a phone would be disconnected from a network. The Tiguan, though, as you see here, beginning at 7:57, paints a breadcrumb trail up towards where a board was recovered near Palmer Lake. There's a slight deviation off the main sort of path there for about a half hour at 8:34 through 9:07. We see from the phone extraction of Letecia's device that Albert had sent her a iMessage at 8:16, but was not read by her device until 9:54. So that means that at least at 9:54, her phone had been turned on, but was not connecting to the cellular network. So likely airplane mode. I'm not sure how else it would work.
So you said, I just want to delve into this with a little more detail. You said phone disconnected from the network, and you mentioned either airplane mode or turned off. When a phone either is put into airplane mode or turned off, does that require conscious effort by whoever the user is on that phone to get it into either one of those two modes?
Yes, I guess the asterisk to that would be your battery could die on your phone. That would turn your phone off without user interaction. But the other two, for sure, you'd have to hold down the power button, or you'd have to, swipe down, click the little thing that turns off all your antennas. One thing to note, though, is when you put your phone in airplane mode, it doesn't necessarily turn off Wi-Fi. It often just turns off cellular. So that could be one reason why you would not see any activity on the AT&T network and why the AT&T network can't see the phone because the cellular antenna is turned off. But the Wi-Fi or Bluetooth could still be active.
And the area that we've noted on this particular page 38, the BR or board recovery, that board recovery location, was that provided to you by investigation contacts in this case?
Yes, it was.
And this doesn't mean that the board was recovered on this particular date, right? It was subsequent some other time.
Correct. And if memory serves me, I think we looked at this data and had a reason to go up there and do a search based off of this data, which is when the board was recovered subsequent to it.
And From the time that Gannon was reported missing on January 27th at 6:55 PM, noted by that 911 call from the defendant's phone, is this the first venture into this part of northern El Paso County / southern Douglas County by any of the data points that you analyzed?
Yes, it was.
Moving on to page 39, what are we looking at there?
Again, it's just Tiguan data on the later hours of January 28th. You can see on there 9:23 is sort of when I picked up, and I start showing all of that data traversing back south towards the Massage Envy location. The vehicle arrived in the shopping center approximately at 11:30, and at 12:53, as I'd mentioned before, is the first activity with Letecia's device back on the AT&T network, and that's going to be 12:53 a.m. on January 29th. Calls prior to that were routed to voicemail, and there was an outgoing call to Albert that was via Wi-Fi at 12:34 as well.
So does this page signify traveling from the area where the board was eventually recovered after this initial visit, just prior to on page 38?
It does, yes.
And then you indicate, tell me the time, was it 12:53 a.m. when the first actual outcoming, or I'm sorry, how did you talk about that?
Yeah, so right around 12:53 is when we first start seeing activity with the AT&T device.
That's what it was. Yeah, that's exactly the words I was looking for.
you
Meaning
go.
now that the phone is either turned back on or taken out of airplane mode, somehow is now accessing the cellular network again.
Exactly, and an outgoing call was placed at that moment.
And then we see ME on this map, just for, we're all tracking with what that is. What is ME?
That would be the Massage Envy work location for Harley.
So essentially traveling from the board recovery location down to location roughly of Massage Envy where Harley works.
That is correct.
Page 40, what are we looking at there?
So following, you can read it, but following that activity near Massage Envy, Letecia's device, AT&T device, then travels back towards the area of the residence and begins to make some outgoing calls and receive some incoming calls and texts. That began at 1:23 and in the morning, and then stretched until 8:29 a.m. that same morning of January 29th. So bringing her phone back to the Stauch residence.
And is this basically Wednesday morning, early morning hours of January 29th?
Yeah, early morning hours through breakfast time.
Page 41, what are we looking at there?
So as you see in my first line there, the Kia was returned at 9. I don't show that on the map. At 11 a.m., the Tiguan records its first activity for the day of the 29th, and it's still near the Massage Envy location. When we look at the Tiguan data, the Life 360 data, and the cellular data as shown on here, it's consistent with the device and vehicle travel from the Massage Envy location down towards the El Paso County Sheriff's Office. At approximately, you see here 11:43 with the Life 360, 11:46 with the Tiguan. Shortly thereafter, her last outbound call was at 11:48, and then El Paso County seized her vehicle and her phone.
So is this going to be the last slide that we see Tiguan telematics data?
We have one more, but then yes.
Okay. But essentially, once it's seized, we don't need to look at any more telematics from that point forward.
Correct. All it would show is the parking lot at the police station.
Yep.
Oh, is the parking lot at the police station. I should have said sheriff's office, but.
Page 42, what are we depicting here?
So this is actually going to be the last one with Tiguan data. So as part of that travel that I just showed you on the prior slide, I noticed there was some oddity in terms of how long it took for the Tiguan and the Life 360 data to get to the sheriff's office. So when I dug into it a little bit, I noticed that the Life 360 and vehicle data took a sort of an unusual route. So here's the main road that it traveled, Platt. 1120, you got the 2 data points up there. 1129, you have a data point right here near your car wash. And then, while I don't have timestamps for all of them, what happens is the vehicle goes up here and it's recorded with Life 360 as well, coming back down and continuing on its way. So it's almost like call it a 5 or 6 minute deviation. So when I looked at Google Earth to figure out, hey, what's there? Why would that happen? Why would it jump on Boulder Road and then snap back to Platt? I noticed that this car wash was located right there. So who knows? It was an interesting sort of find, if you will. I would have thought somebody would have just traveled straight from point A to point B.
Okay. Did you have information from the investigation that when the defendant showed up at the sheriff's office, it appeared to people at the sheriff's office that her car had been recently washed and was still wet?
I did, actually, yes.
Okay. And so does this potentially corroborate that information, that possibility that this car wash was used to wash that vehicle?
Definitely.
Moving on to page 43, what are we looking at here?
So following Letecia's phone being seized and the Tiguan data, or the Tiguan vehicle being seized, we no longer had Letecia's AT&T records, we no longer had Life 360 records, and we no longer had the Tiguan telematics records. So there's a gap, as you see here, from January 29th around noon for a little over 2 days. The next data set that we had geolocation activity for was on January 31st at approximately 3:30. Now, between that time, and you can obviously read it, a Brenda Acquard had rented a Nissan Altima on January 30th. And 9:44 on January 31st, Letecia had rented a cargo van, which is not shown on here. At 3:38, a GPS tracker happened to be affixed to that Nissan that was rented, but Letecia was seen driving. So following that at 3:38, we started to get data. And as you can see here, these green dots are GPS, location markers for that Nissan. We see that Nissan up back in the area of where that board had been was subsequently recovered. And the device, or that vehicle, spent approximately an hour up in that general area.
So is this the second trip up to that area in a vehicle associated with the defendant after Gannon was reported missing on the evening of January 27th?
That I was aware of, yes.
Okay.
There could always be other ones that we don't have data for.
Okay. So Tiguan is in custody at this time with the sheriff's office. Is that right?
That's correct.
Her cell phone, the AT&T cell phone, is in custody of the sheriff's office at this time.
Correct.
And so then this GPS tracker is the only way to really track any potential movements that you are aware of at this particular time.
That is correct.
And just so that we're tracking as far as record, this is the early evening or early afternoon, late afternoon, early evening of Wednesday, January 29th.
No, we are.
January 30th.
Nope, we've actually jumped 2 days. We're now on January 31st that afternoon.
So Friday.
Yes.
Okay. My apologies. I got all cattywampus on the days.
There's a lot of days. There's a lot of stuff.
What are we looking at in page 44?
All right. So these are the new locations of interest for the back half of my analysis. So you see the dates February 1st through February 6th. Again, a variety of locations. Each map will have a legend. Don't have to memorize it. The ones that are pertinent will show up on those maps, but we have a lot of different areas covering a lot of different parts of the country.
And so, again, are these randomly selected by you, or are these given to you by somebody with the investigation as points of interest?
These were provided to me as points of interest based on what the investigators were uncovering.
The subsequent slides that we're going to look at, does it essentially show travel from the Colorado Springs area into the Pensacola area and then terminating in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina?
It does.
Page 45, what are we looking at there?
So on the morning of February 1st, Letecia rented a cargo van from Budget in Colorado Springs. And as I'd mentioned earlier in my testimony, this particular van was equipped with a GPS device that recorded locations every 6 hours. So again, not the breadcrumb trails like we saw with the Tiguan, but it does give us helpful points of reference a couple times a day. Following that, that rental, we see a data point down here at 1010 near a truck stop or a Love's truck stop in Pueblo along I-25. So clearly the vehicle has already began to move away from where it was rented.
So we're now south of the Colorado Springs area, closer to Pueblo at this truck stop?
That's correct.
Okay. And this is on again, the date would be Saturday, February 1st?
Correct.
Page 46.
So I was provided some financial records and surveillance that indicated that Letecia had visited this particular Walmart in Trinidad. We then subsequently learned of a Verizon phone that was associated with her that had been activated on that day. What we're looking at here is Verizon has a unique data set known as RTT, which is essentially an estimated distance from tower measurement. So as long as the Verizon device is powered on, these RTT events are, for the most part, recorded. And I say as long as it's powered on because smartphones these days, there's a lot of things that are going on in the background. Your apps are trying to update. You may have surfed the web, but you didn't actually close your browser. So there's stuff being sent back and forth. You might have a number of apps on your phone. You might have Facebook, whatever it might be. All of those network interactions between your phone and the towers generate signaling data, which is what RTT is. And so what we saw here is the Verizon network at 1:01 p.m. on the February 1st, and then again at 1:02, had recorded 2 distance measurements. And so what Verizon is saying is that based on, it's essentially based on how long it takes the signal to go from the phone to the tower, they divide that by the speed of light, and that gives them an estimate as to how far away the phone is from the tower. So they're saying at this moment, that phone was approximately 1.55 and 1.6 miles away from this tower sector, which conveniently or coincidentally, I guess, corresponds with the location of the Walmart. So these, again, are the first 2. So this is only going to happen when if it's a prepaid phone, the first time you turn on the phone, it needs to connect with the network, right? So the phone was powered on at approximately 1 o'clock. Verizon can't say where in this band the phone was, right? So the phone could have been over here. Phone could have been in this corner. Phone could have been on I-25. Verizon doesn't know, but it knows based on that simple calc of the time divided by the speed of light that that phone is estimated at that distance away from that particular tower.
And this is corroborated, I think you already mentioned it, but by information you obtained that the defendant bought a phone at this particular Walmart.
Correct.
Page 47, what are we looking at here?
We've now jumped a little bit further in the day. We've now transitioned to Central Time as well. We've changed time zones. At 5:10, there is a GPS marker from the van as recorded there near that town, Dalhart, Texas. Letecia's Verizon device placed a number of outgoing calls during this time. Again, consistent, using towers at least, consistent with travel. Well, I guess the towers were along 385. I can't necessarily say which road she was traveling on. But you see, based sequentially, that her phone is continuing to travel southward into Texas.
And the Verizon records that we're talking about now are based off of that phone that was purchased at the Walmart in Trinidad, Colorado.
That's correct. And the other thing to note on this one, of these 5 calls, even though it's not shown here in the call-out box, when you look at the raw records, 067 was used prior to dialing the number. So if 067 basically blocks your caller ID from appearing on whoever's device you're calling. So, and then similar to the blues, the Verizon towers in the area are red. Blue was AT&T previously.
Is 067 and star 67 essentially the
Oh.
same thing depending?
I meant to say star 67.
Okay,
Did I say
thank you.
0?
You said 067.
My apologies. Star 67 is what you would use to block your caller ID.
Does that star 67 require conscious effort to do that, or can a phone just automatically do it?
Yeah, no, you'd have to do that yourself. I'm not sure of, I don't know of any way where you could accidentally do that or have the phone accidentally
Okay.
do that.
Requiring conscious effort by whoever's using that particular device.
I would say so.
Page 48, what are we looking at here?
We're now farther south into Amarillo, Texas. CS is the Candlewood Suites, a hotel in that area. From 6:59 through 9:59, then 6:59 p.m. through 9:59 the next morning, you see that Letecia's device uses that Verizon tower adjacent to the hotel. I have a little zoom in right there, and you can see the cargo van's GPS putting it outside that same hotel. At 7 o'clock, her device also placed an outgoing call to the same hotel. And then financial records support that she had at least rented a room there that night. As I mentioned before, their Verizon records don't give us the cell tower information for text messages. So all we're going to see for Verizon are phone calls or those RTT events, those distance from tower measurements. But her device placed its first outbound user initiated text at approximately 8:38 that night, which went to a 312 Chicago area code.
And basically from the area where this Candlewood Suites is located in Amarillo, Texas.
Correct. Well, I can't say where the text message came from, but based on the phone activity from her calls, her last call before that was at 8:55, or last call before that was at 7:56. First call after was 8:55. How far can your phone go in 20 minutes, kind of thing?
Okay. So generally in the same general area.
I would say so, yeah.
Okay. Page 49, what are we looking at here?
So later in the morning into the afternoon of February 2nd, Letecia's device leaves the Candlewood Suites area and continues traveling southeast, as shown here. So when I zoom out on my maps, it becomes hard to see the sector. So I've replaced them with just these red dots to indicate the cell towers utilized. But you see there's a variety of calls being made, all outgoing in this instance, to a number and a North Carolina phone number ending in 5030.
And then all of those other little red dots in the map, are those just other cell towers in that particular area that would show up on this map?
Yes, those are other Verizon cell towers in the area that the phone could have utilized if it saw that tower as being best at that moment in time. But the phone chose those towers that have the associated numbers on them. And those towers seem to align with the 287 roadway.
Does this indicate, again, just consistent travel southeast through Texas, eventually going down to Pensacola and then Myrtle Beach?
Exactly, yes.
Page 50, what's depicted here?
Same afternoon. We see Letecia's device now approaching Bellevue, Texas. The 6-hour cargo van GPS marker shows up there at 5:10. She uses that same tower for an outgoing call at 5:27 with that same 5030 number, which was associated with an Amy Lowry. But long and short is this is just consistent with her device continuing to travel south, utilizing towers along the 287 roadway.
Page 51.
So this is Decatur, Texas. That evening at approximately 6 o'clock, her phone utilized that tower and sector at 607, facing back towards the Candlewood Suites. Again, there's a GPS marker as shown at 1110. But a variety of activity through the 3 towers shown by Letecia's phone. Again, multitude of outgoing calls to that same 5030 number. Of note, when I looked at some of the activity, there was a 45-minute call with a number coming back to an Abernathy residence, followed immediately by an 83-minute call with that same Amy Lowry. And when I looked back throughout the day of February 2nd, Letecia had spent nearly 5 hours speaking with that Amy Lowry number ending in 5030.
And the 3 hotels that are going to be denoted in these slides, are they all Candlewood Suites?
99% sure, but I just wanted to double check.
So the one in Amarillo and now the one in Decatur and then in Pensacola?
Correct.
Okay. Page 52, what are we looking at here?
All right. So now the morning of February 3rd, Letecia's device has some activity around 9 a.m. through that tower, through a tower just north of the Candlewood Suites. Overnight, you saw the budget rent-a-truck pings that are right there near the Candlewood Suites as well. Shortly after that, around 11:23, you start to see her phone traveling because we have an outgoing call using this tower and sector here, which is far south of the suites, and then this one over here at 11:25. As you see, there's not a lot of stuff going on there. You just got a Verizon tower here and a Verizon tower there. There's nothing really in between.
Not much going on in that part of Texas, apparently.
Probably, well, the carriers put in towers where they have customers, right?
Yeah.
Because every tower can only handle a certain amount of phones. So that would tell me there's probably not a lot of Verizon customers right there.
Okay. Page 53, what are we looking at here?
So I jump ahead a little bit. There was a call outside of Dallas that afternoon of February 3rd that I didn't show, but Letecia's device and the GPS from the truck are consistent with travel eastward towards Mobile, Alabama. That evening, you see at 11:10 down here, outgoing call about an hour earlier, just west of Mobile.
And so we're on February 3rd, I believe here. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
So roughly a week after Gannon Stauch has been reported missing by the defendant on January 27th at 6:55 p.m.
That is correct, yes.
And then page 54, what are we looking at here?
So this Candlewood Suites is in Pensacola, and we see her device, the Verizon device, show up with first recorded data session at approximately 12:39 a.m. the morning of February 4th. We have some outgoing activity the next morning, like later that morning around 9:47. But at 4:15, we have a GPS marker from the cargo van. And if you remember that the cargo van flags every 6 hours, but it also has a power-up event once a day that occurs at not a consistent period. It was traditionally in the morning, but not at the same moment. So this event at 4:15 puts this cargo van approximately 1.8 miles away from where it subsequently records a GPS marker at 5:10, so approximately 55 minutes later. As you see in the red icon up there is where Gannon's body was subsequently recovered there in Pensacola. Yeah.
Okay. Let me just make sure that we got everything I want to get out of this particular slide. We made note of this at the very beginning. When we're talking about 4:15 a.m. or 5:10 a.m., this is local to the Pensacola area,
That is correct. Yes.
these times. Okay.
Yeah.
Page 55, what are we looking at here?
So just to be sort of thorough, I had asked one of my colleagues who lives down in this area, one of my CAS colleagues, if he would be able to go do some drive testing for us because I wanted to understand the coverage area of these Verizon phones or the Verizon towers that Letecia's phone had used. And you see the two towers shown here that she has had some data sessions with in the early morning hours of April 4th. What you see, and it's a little bit muddy and somewhat of an ink blob, but the serviceable coverage areas of those two towers don't extend all the way to where that budget or where the GPS marker was recorded on that cargo truck. So what does this tell us? Well, if the phone had had activity during the early morning hours around that 4 o'clock window, we would have expected it to have utilized a different cell tower, right? It was about 1.8 miles away. So this just confirmed to us that at the time shown on this slide and at the previous slide, that the phone was in and around the area of the Candlewood Suites and was not as far up as where the budget truck was, GPS marker was.
Could it also mean that just no phone activity is being initiated on that particular phone while the budget truck is moving?
Oh yeah, definitely, right? Because we can only talk about the general area of where a device is when there is activity, right? When it records a connection with the tower. So without that, we wouldn't know where it was.
If there had been phone activity beyond the coverage area indicated by these pink and green blobs here, would it likely have connected to a different tower if there was phone activity?
Yes, it would have.
Page 56, what do we have there?
So around noon on the April 4th, Letecia's device left the Pensacola area along with the truck. And these multitude of red dots are all the Verizon cell towers that the phone utilized along the way. And this was generated primarily from that timing advanced data, that stuff that's going on behind the scenes. During this case, we had somewhat gaps in some of the data as provided by Verizon, so we didn't have consistent timing advanced data for everything. But as you can see, it's pretty clear cut the direction and path that phone takes as it travels south into the Orlando area. And it arrives in the Orlando area at approximately 12:10 a.m. Eastern time. We've now jumped one more time zone on February 5th.
Okay.
Oops,
sorry, thought you were done with that one.
So did I, but I screwed you up on that one.
Okay. What
yeah.
else? What else of
nothing? They can read it. We're good.
Okay.
Sorry, everyone.
All right. Moving on to page 57. What are we looking at here?
Letecia's Verizon device remained in Orlando in that area until dinner time. And at approximately 6:30, again, based on the red dots, you can see that phone starts to travel northward. This 10:17 a.m., that was a time stamp mistake. That's actually 10:17 p.m. I didn't catch it. Peer reviewer didn't catch it. My apologies. As I mentioned, there was gaps in the data. So once that phone traversed into Georgia, we didn't actually get any more RTT data. But we do see at 10:12 a.m. On February 6th, that the truck is at least now outside of Savannah, Georgia, technically in Pooler, Georgia.
So we have van data down in the Orlando area at 6:10 a.m. and then again at 12:10 a.m., signifying that 6-hour gap when it would do the drop of breadcrumb.
That's correct, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else of note on this one before I move on?
Nope.
They can read it?
Yeah.
Okay. Page 58, what are we looking at there?
So we're now morning, a little later in the morning on February 6th. Letecia's phone utilized a tower down here at 5:20 for some outgoing calls. At 10:42, it utilized that tower and sector facing the Abernathy residence for some outgoing calls. You see the GPS pings from the device or from the vehicle. There's a budget rental location down there, which is where the vehicle was subsequently dropped off. that star 67 that I mentioned before, these outgoing calls on this day also had that star 67 to block the caller ID to the person answering it. And there was a total, Letecia's device had 73 text messages recorded by Verizon. Again, we don't get the cell tower, but we at least know that there's a decent amount of activity going on with her device during this period.
It just dawned on me to be a little more clear on the star 67. If I put star 67 into my phone and then I call you, what's it going to show up on your end?
I think each carrier handles it a little bit differently, but typically it says like private number or blocked number or no caller ID available.
So it essentially, if somebody on the outgoing call phone puts in star 67, it's to block the receiver from seeing who the call is coming in from.
That's correct.
Okay. Page 59, what do we got there?
The overview slide. So going back to February 1st, bringing it all the way through to February 6th, here's all the various GPS or location data that existed during the time. So we have Letecia's Verizon phone, and we have the rental truck's GPS. And so that is what you see here, bringing it from Colorado Springs area all the way down to Florida and then up into the Myrtle Beach area.
And spreading across basically from February 1st all the way to February 6th, so roughly 5 days worth of travel.
That's correct.
That sort of travel route, would that require multiple stops along the route in a gas-powered vehicle like what this van was
Oh yeah.
to get gas?
Use gas, use the bathroom, eat.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let me just check with my colleagues to make sure I didn't miss anything. That's all I have. Thank you.
Mr. Tellini, cross-examination. Pardon? Do any of the jurors have any questions for Agent Quinlan? No? All right. Thank you, sir. You may step down.
Thank you very much.
Well, he's stepping down, but I'm just going to think that's right.
Prosecution, call your next witness, please.
Morning, Your Honor. We call Dr. Christine Moore.
You don't need it up here, right?
No. You want that?
Dr. Moore, if you would step forward and raise your right hand, please, ma'am. Do you swear affirm the testimony about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes. Go ahead and have a seat in the witness stand. Please watch your step as you step into the stand. Mr. Young, on the matter that we talked about earlier, qualify the witness first, and then I'll give the instruction.
Sounds good, Your Honor. Good morning.
Good morning.
Could you please introduce yourself to the jury and spell your last name for the record?
Sure. I am Dr. Christine Moore, M-O-H-R.
And what is your occupation?
Currently, I am a clinical program director for Larned State Hospital's Sexually Violent Offender Treatment Program.
And how did you get the title doctor?
I received my doctorate in clinical psychology in 2014, completed over 2,000 hours of clinical training for towards my licensure, and then applied for my licensure, took my licensure exam, and have been a licensed clinical psychologist since 2016.
And what kind of roles have you had, jobs have you had as a clinical psychologist?
Typically, I've worked in psychiatric hospitals, jails, prisons. I've been a forensic psychologist, so conducting sexual and violent risk evaluations, sexual predator evaluations, parole evaluations, assisted with civil commitments for individuals who are mentally ill. So worked in a variety of settings.
And in those variety of settings, have you both treated patients and also done forensic examinations of patients?
Yes.
Could you distinguish those two for the jury? What are we talking about when we say clinical examination?
So a clinical examination is typically something, an evaluation where you're looking to provide a diagnosis or understanding of um, what could be concerning about that person, what sort of mental illness might they meet criteria for. Whereas a forensic setting, you're typically looking, again, maybe assessing for risk, again, any sort of violence risk, sexual risk. You assess for faking mental illness, so feigning illnesses. Also forensic wise, in some of my prior roles, I've conducted pre-sentence evaluations, lack of mental state or insanity evaluations, competency evaluations, pre-sentence evaluations. So again, you're kind of looking to assess somebody's, you're either wanting to diagnose and help develop a treatment plan, or ultimately look and assess somebody's risk in more of a legal setting.
And so approximately how many clinical examinations have you conducted as a psychologist?
Hundreds, I'd say probably close to 400 at least.
And how about forensic examinations as a forensic psychologist?
About the same. It's been kind of my roles have switched back and forth. So in those roles, I've conducted hundreds of evaluations.
And are you licensed to practice psychology in any states?
Yes, I am licensed to practice here in Colorado as well as in Kansas.
And what does it mean to be licensed to practice psychology? Let's talk about the state of Colorado.
Sure. So it means that you've met the required qualifications to, as required for the Colorado Licensure Board, and here it's called DORA, the Department of Regulatory Agencies. So I've met all of those qualifications based on my education, experience, and training, as well as passed what we call the EPPP. It's the psychologist examination, and you have to score above a 70% on that exam in order to become fully licensed. And once you've met all of that criteria, then they will authorize you to be licensed and to practice as a psychologist in the state.
And does each state have its own requirements to have a license in psychology?
Yes,
And are you licensed in other states?
Kansas.
And is that where you currently work?
Yes.
Are you, do you have any training, or do you have what we call as lawyers CLEs? Do you have annual training that you have to go to keep your license?
Yes, so I have to do that both for for Kansas and Colorado, between 40 and 50 hours of continuing education, and specifically in ethics, also about diagnosing, ensuring that you are familiar with the DSM-5 and making sure that you are able to accurately diagnose, and then things specific to your field. So especially when I've worked mostly in forensic related settings, I also tend to prefer to obtain additional CEUs in those sort of settings. So being trained and qualified to perform the risk assessments, personality assessments, malingering assessments, intellectual disability assessments, things like that. So I also focus my CEUs in those areas.
And you mentioned the DSM-5. What is the DSM-5?
That is a diagnostic and statistical manual. So it's in the mental health field. We typically use that as a guide to help with diagnoses. So it has the criteria of what each diagnosis is required that you have to meet. It also provides kind of some associated symptoms related to different diagnoses, just to help the clinician really ensure that that's the person that they're assessing is meeting that criteria.
And is that used throughout the country?
Yes.
Do you stay up on recent literature and things that are going on in the field of psychology and the fields of forensic psychology?
Yes.
And what do you do to do that?
Mostly that's CEUs, but again, just going out, ensuring that I am trained and seek out the trainings that do allow me to do my job. So, for example, like a sexual risk assessment, you have to be qualified and trained to conduct that sort of assessment. So I'll go out and get additional CEUs in those areas just to make sure I am trained and qualified to do what I do.
Okay. And have you given presentations or have you taught classes with regards to psychology and forensic psychology?
Yes, a couple years ago, most recently was at the National Commission on Correctional Healthcare. I had conducted and written trainings there, but also just numerous other trainings related to personality disorders, um, just different symptoms. I always, um, i- in some of my roles as a supervisor administrator, I've also had to train other people on how to conduct these sort of evaluations, whether they're the clinical or the forensic evaluations.
And when you're teaching these classes or giving these presentations, are they to other psychologists?
Usually, there's other psychologists, mostly at the master's level, but typically other psychologists as well and other experts in the field.
And have you received any honors or awards in the field of psychology and forensic psychology?
Yes, I can't remember what they are off the top of my head.
Did you give us a resume or CV?
I did.
Uh, We don't need to go through those, but have you testified as an expert in the field of psychology and forensic psychology?
Yes, most specifically in civil commitment hearings, conducting sexual predator evaluations, risk assessments, things like that. Yes.
Approximately how many times?
A lot of times, despite writing the evaluations that I did, I wasn't called to testify. So it's been more the civil commitment side, probably around 30 times.
And what is a civil commitment proceeding?
So that's typically when somebody is mentally ill. They have a severe and persistent mental illness where they do not want treatment. And so we have to commit to them to a psychiatric hospital against their will. And so we're essentially telling, usually it's a magistrate judge, some of their symptoms and why they would benefit from treatment against their objection.
Okay. Now, at this time, I'd ask that Dr. Moore be qualified as an expert in the fields of general psychology and forensic psychology, and ask that she be allowed to give opinions in those fields.
Defense?
Can we approach?
You may. All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are about to hear evidence or testimony from this witness. The evidence you are about to hear goes to the issue of insanity and insanity alone. With that, prosecution.
Thanks, Judge. Dr. Moore, could you give the jury a little bit more specifics of what your role is now and what you're doing in your job out in the
Sure. So as the clinical program director of the sexual predator treatment program, we have over 250 civilly committed sexually violent predators. So in the state of Kansas, when somebody is deemed a sexually violent predator prior to their release from prison, they go for 2 evaluations, a clinical service evaluation and then a sexual predator evaluation. And then they're civilly committed to the program. So we are required by law to provide them care and treatment related to their sexual offending behaviors. So I oversee all of the clinical aspects of that. I supervise numerous master's level psychologists and master's level social workers. They're the ones that are typically providing treatment. I also chair what we call the progress review panel, so help evaluate if people are progressing in treatment or need to be returned to more intense levels of treatment. I supervise the forensic evaluator, so that person role is to conduct initial evaluations to clarify diagnoses. And they also do annual evaluations that are required by law for the court to determine if that person still meets civil commitment criteria as a sexually violent predator.
What were you doing back in March of 2020?
I was the mental health director at the El Paso County Jail. In that role, I supervised the master's level therapist there, the discharge planner, oversaw all of the psychiatric care. So supervise a psychiatrist, the psychiatric nurse practitioner, the psych nurse, just again, ensuring that care was adequately provided to approximately 1,500 inmates at any given time in the jail setting.
And before we get into the details with regards to this case, we talked about a clinical diagnosis or a clinical, your role as a clinical psychologist versus your role as a forensic psychologist. Can you explain the difference between the two? And let's start with what a clinical psychologist might do and how you treat a patient who may come see you.
Sure. So in a clinical psychologist role, somebody is typically coming in due to some either whether it's them self-reporting some mental health concerns. It could be something like anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, things like that. And what we do is we start by conducting an initial evaluation and diagnostic clarification to make sure that we do have an accurate diagnosis. And then from there, we develop a treatment plan in order to help stabilize them, whether that would include individual therapy, group therapy. We might refer them to a psychiatrist for medication management as well, and then typically try to work with a team in the sense of whether nursing staff are involved. Like I said, the mental health staff, psychiatry, just trying to have a pretty collaborative approach to somebody's needed treatment.
And in a clinical setting, are you relying much like a medical doctor may do on what the patient's telling you, at least at the beginning, to see how that mental illness may be treated?
Yes. So typically we will ask them kind of a broad series of questions to cover any potential diagnoses. So kind of casting a wide net to see what concerns that they have. And then if it's pretty clear what their diagnosis is, we'll kind of hone into that area. So maybe they report, for example, that they're depressed and they meet criteria for a major depressive disorder. And we'll go in and develop a treatment plan specific to that. If we are not sure, or they might have symptom overlap, which tends to be common. We don't all fit into nice boxes. So sometimes there might be prominent depression with maybe some anxiety on the side. So we'll, if we need to clarify, we might do some testing in order to make sure that we know that we have the accurate diagnosis.
And this diagnosis that you're making, you alluded to, if it fits the criteria or use words to that effect. What do you refer to see what the criteria is for any given specific mental illness?
The DSM-5.
And within the DSM-5, is that where the criteria might be listed for whatever mental illness you're looking at?
Yes.
And do you use that in a clinical setting to make a diagnosis as to whether or not someone actually has a mental illness?
Yes.
Now, before we talk about the forensic psychologist evaluation, is there any cautionary statement in the DSM-5 in the use of that manual with regards to forensic evaluations?
Yes, you always want to make sure especially in a forensic setting, to be very cautious, because in forensic settings, just by the nature of them, there could be some ulterior motive or gain. So you want to be extra sure and clear, make sure you are clarifying that is in fact the correct diagnosis that you are going to then provide treatment for or write in in an evaluation report that goes to the court per se.
And is that statement in the DSM-5, or do you know why it's in there with regards to forensic interviews?
Just because of the nature of them and because people can have a tendency to maybe elaborate or exaggerate maybe fake symptoms of a mental health diagnosis, so that way that they are deemed they're not taking full responsibility. They're kind of blaming it on maybe a mental health diagnosis as opposed to their true own behavior.
Oh, I understand you correctly, is the clinical setting, they may not have as much to gain or lose by what they're telling you versus a forensic setting, they might be motivated to tell you something because they have something to gain. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
And is that why, for instance, in a forensic setting, would you rely on everything a prospective patient might tell you, or would you want to look at collateral information to see whether or not that makes sense?
It is very pertinent to look at the collateral information. So yeah, you would take that person's self-report. If you could talk to any family members, if you could obtain prior records to, again, confirm. You also do assessments that have validity scales in them. So most, let's say, personality assessments, they have embedded in them certain questions that will detect if someone is feigning or faking symptoms or over exaggerating under reporting symptoms. So we do that. And then there's also a specific set of tests that are specific for, again, malingering or faking symptoms. So I've been trained in those assessments as well. And again, we'll typically use those to just confirm or refute a diagnosis.
Okay. I want to go back to March of 2020 in your role at the El Paso County Jail. As part of that role, were you one of the individuals who might screen inmates as they come in of serious criminal charges?
Yes.
For instance, inmates who are charged with first-degree murder, is there a process that they go through when they come through the jail?
The process is typically consistent for almost anyone coming in the jail. The first thing that we do is a receiving screening that the nursing staff will do. And so they kind of go through, get all of the baseline or historical medical concerns, kind of do a brief suicide assessment, initiate any medical, mental health or psychiatric referrals. And then if it's maybe somebody who's a little bit more concerning, they will be referred for a mental health assessment, typically within 24 hours. At the latest, it would be at 7 days. So everybody would come in, have the receiving screening and an initial mental health assessment.
And why do you do this mental health screen with inmates, particularly inmates that are charged with first-degree murder?
To ensure that whatever anybody is coming into the jail for, that we can adequately care for and manage any symptoms. In a higher profile case, given my higher level of licensure compared to most of my team that worked there, they were mostly master's level clinicians. I typically would try to meet with those individuals that have higher profile crimes, just because I have a pretty extensive history working in that forensic setting and providing diagnoses. So that's why I would typically go see somebody, and specific for higher profile crimes, because of the nature of them, we always want to ensure somebody's safety. So typically people who come in, again, with higher level crimes, I'll, as a safety precaution, put them on suicide watch initially, just to ensure that, given the nature of the crime, sometimes in and of itself going to jail is traumatic. It's kind of a scary place. And so I just want to ensure that that person is safe. I mean, ultimately in the jail setting, safety is the key. So we will also do a pretty thorough suicide risk assessment with them.
Do you also do an assessment to make sure they're not a harm to anyone else at the jail?
Yes.
We're going to talk about this case and this defendant. Did you have an opportunity to do an assessment of a Letecia Stauch on March 5th of 2020?
I did.
And is it the same Letecia Stauch that's seated to my left, seated in between the two male attorneys at the table here?
Yes.
May the record reflect identification of Ms. Stauch.
Record will so reflect, okay.
Earlier, you alluded to that high-profile cases, first-degree murder charges, you might take a role. Is that how you got involved in this case?
Yes.
So tell us about that. What was why did you meet with Letecia Stauch on March 5th, 2020?
I met with her to conduct her mental health initial assessment. Again, assess for suicidality, homicidality, again, initial diagnostic assessment, see what referrals might be needed, specific to her given the nature of the alleged crime. Also, just checking in as a stepmother, making sure that she's safe, she's okay, and see how she was adjusting. To my knowledge, she does not have a criminal history. So again, like I said earlier, going to the jail for the first time, it can be somewhat traumatic. It can be scary. People don't really know what to expect. It's a totally different environment. So again, just making sure that my intent was to assess her to ensure her safety and stability while under our care.
And what was her demeanor like when you first met her?
She was, from my recollection, generally very calm, polite. She reported kind of some general symptoms, but we had a very lucid, fluid conversation where there weren't any significant concerns raised. I do recall she was not really in agreement with being on suicide watch, but again, just due to the nature of her alleged crime, as well as being somebody in jail for the first time, I had placed her on suicide watch just as a safety precaution.
And have you done that with many inmates who are charged with first-degree murder just as a
Yes.
precaution?
Mhm.
As you're talking to her for the first time, did you notice any obvious signs of any mental illness that she may have had at that point?
She not anything overt. Again, just being in jail, I think everyone can be a little bit anxious or nervous. I do recall her reporting a history of a generalized anxiety disorder diagnosis. So that seemed fairly consistent. Her self-report of that seemed consistent with how she was presenting.
And as part of your role at the jail there is to prescribe medication that the inmate might need if they do have a mental illness?
My role is not to prescribe. I'm not licensed to prescribe medication, but what I do is put a referral in for somebody to see the psychiatrist. If somebody comes in with prescribed medications that we can verify, then the nursing staff can call the doctor and get those medications started, or the doctor can meet with them and start the medication themselves.
And do you know whether or not that was done with regards to Ms. Stauch?
Yes, our psychiatrist, Dr. Hargraves, had also met with her, I believe on March 5th as well, and prescribed her, I believe it was hydroxyzine, which is an anti-anxiety medication. It's a very kind of generic low medication. It's not something like an antipsychotic, which has helped to kind of prevent some symptoms. It just kind of helps calm down your anxiety a little bit.
And I still want to stay on the March 5th, 2020, and your first meeting with Ms. Stauch. Are you also, is this a kind of a clinical evaluation at this point? Are you also evaluating if there's anything or some mental illness that she might need that you can either refer out or facilitate at that moment?
Yes.
And as part of that evaluation, do you ask her if she has any mental illnesses?
Yes.
And how did she respond to that?
She had reported having the prior diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder.
As you already alluded to? Did she mention any other potential disorders that she might have?
Not that I recall.
Did you see any signs of any mental illness other than what she was telling you about the generalized anxiety?
No.
And when I talk about signs, what does that mean to you?
Signs or symptoms, typically when people have a mental illness, they will have, you can kind of see it. So let's say, for example, somebody could be responding to internal stimuli, and that might be consistent with more of a psychotic disorder. None of that was observed. So sometimes they might be looking around at the room or talking to themselves under their breath. They might seem very sullen or depressed or uncontrollable crying. They might be having more of a manic sort of mood episode. So they might be talking very rapidly. So just a lot of behavioral observations. So speech, affect, body presentation, things like that. Why we just look at all of that in order to determine a sign or symptom.
And why is the term psychosis kind of what you're describing, where they're looking around and acting like someone's there who's not there, or hearing voices that you can't hear, that only they can hear, that kind of thing?
Yes.
Why are you looking for that, or why is that relevant in your evaluation, and particularly with Ms. Stauch when you first met her on March 5th?
That's going to play in how we're going to treat her. So somebody who might be psychotic, so to speak, we might need to, again, just to put them in a potentially restrictive housing. If their behavior is very erratic, we might need to bump up a psychiatric referral, monitor medication compliance if they're prescribed medication, just to ensure that stability. So looking for that, it's just important to see how we will manage them in a jail setting, what sort of unit or housing location is best for them. And again, just to see how often we might need to follow up with them.
Okay. Is psychosis, where you're hearing things or seeing things that aren't there, is that tied to a severe mental illness? Did you see that in someone?
Yes.
And is that one of the things you might be looking for when you meet anybody in your initial diagnosis, or someone who's entered at the jail for first degree murder? See that, you may have to go to a plan B, C, or D.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
And you didn't see any of that with Ms. Stauch when you first met her?
I did not.
Did you ask Ms. Stauch about whether or not she had any outpatient treatment for any mental illnesses?
I did ask her that.
And how did she respond to that?
She denied any prior hospitalizations or treatment.
So does that include any inpatient or outpatient treatment?
Yes.
I know it's pretty obvious, but what's the difference between the two?
So outpatient treatment, you might go to therapy. You might drive yourself to therapy once a week. And inpatient is where you're living there. It could be something as short as 72 hours to years. Again, a higher level intensive treatment is inpatient treatment with 24-hour around-the-clock care. And outpatient is you're able to fairly well manage your own symptoms, but might need a little bit of assistance. So you see a therapist.
Okay. Now, if she would have said that, hey, I had inpatient treatment before I was hospitalized for whatever mental disorder, would you have taken additional steps to see what you needed to do within the jail to help her?
Yes,
No need to do that in this case?
correct.
As you're talking to Ms. Stauch, and we're going to get into several days where you met with her, how are you documenting your meetings?
I always, when I would go to the unit, I would take a pen and paper with me, a little notepad, and I would write down my notes. I would quote things that people said, write down my behavioral observations of that person, and then I would go back to our office area where there was a computer and document that in our electronic medical record system.
And would you document things so that others can see those, particularly in the jail? If, for instance, you mentioned the psychiatrist wanted to come see her, they could look at your notes and get a historical, documented path of what's been going on, Ms. Stauch.
Yes.
And does that go for all the way to today? You know that she has pled not guilty by reason of insanity. Can other doctors look at your notes and use that in determining whether or not Ms. Stauch is sane or insane?
Yes.
Did you also note whether or not any psychotropic medication was needed for Ms. Stauch?
I noted that, again, my understanding was her primary care doctor had prescribed her hydroxyzine to help with some anxiety, and I believe lorazepam to help with the same. Sometimes that's a little bit more of a medication that it's a bit quicker
Okay.
acting.
And did you note that in your notes then?
Yes.
All right. Now, with regards to the prior diagnosis, did Ms. Stauch tell you when she was diagnosed with this generalized anxiety?
I believe it was about 2 to 3 years prior to coming into the jail.
If your notes indicate that it was at age 16, would that be accurate?
If my notes indicate that, then yes.
If I can approach, Your Honor. I don't have a bait page on these notes, but it's from March 5th. If I may approach, Your Honor.
You may.
And I'll just direct you to this sentence here.
Yes.
Now, are these your March 5th, 2020 notes?
Yes.
Has that refreshed your recollection as to when she said she was diagnosed with generalized anxiety?
Yes.
How old was she?
16.
Did she happen to tell you who diagnosed her?
No.
Did you talk to her about any past suicide attempts?
Yes.
How did she respond to that?
I believe that she said that she had not attempted suicide before.
Again, I have the privilege of looking at your
Sure.
notes. If you have your notes with you, you can use those, okay? If it helps refresh your
Okay.
recollection, just let us know when
Sure.
you're doing that. if That's okay?
Okay.
Mr. Young, can you find a reasonable breaking point in the next 5 minutes or so, please?
We could stop now if you like, Judge, if it's convenient for you.
Give it some time to look through our notes then.
That's great.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we will take our noon recess. If I can have everyone back in the jury room at say 1:30, we should be able to start on time at that point. Again, do not discuss the case among yourselves. Do not discuss the case with anyone else. Do not do your own independent research about any aspect of this case. With that, I'll rise for the jury, please.
Great catch. And did you say?
1:30. Thank you. May all be seated. Record should reflect the jury has left the courtroom. Dr. Moore, you can. All right, court will be in recess. Thank you.
So I'm just.
All
gonna-
right.